Yooka Laylee was intended to be the spiritual successor to the Banjo-Kazooie games, and needless to say, when I first heard about it, I got really excited. Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, and to a lesser extent Donkey Kong 64, are some of my favorite games of all time. Even though I've always been aware of some of their flaws, to the point that I made an entire video talking about all the things I don't like about those games, I can never really get tired of them. They're just so charming and funny, and they offer a lot of rewarding collectibles and challenges. Collectathons get hate because it's mostly just number go up gameplay, but what makes these games so fun is the context for those numbers going up. It feels like an adventure, like you crossed treacherous, dangerous lands and overcame deadly obstacles and used your brilliant powers of observation to find everything. And that's what Rare platformers were. They were an adventure. Rare spent 2 straight console generations dropping banger after banger on Nintendo's consoles, and for a while it seemed like they were unstoppable. They were like a video game dream team, a better team than someone else. Now, I'm sure you all know where the story goes next, because in the year 2021, people still won't stop talking about it and mourning it and grieving it, and I know a lot of you are sick and tired of hearing some maulding fat ass on YouTube talk about it over and over again, but for the 2 of you who are unfamiliar with the story, prepare yourself, because it has a very sad ending. Right on the back of Rareware basically putting out a constant stream of million-seller lightning bolt masterpiece work of art exclusive games on Nintendo's platforms for the better part of a decade, Nintendo makes the genius decision to sell Rare and all the intellectual properties that came with it to Microsoft. Every time I think about this moment in history, it just confuses me more. Like, Rare and Nintendo were such a great fit for each other because Rare put out plenty of family-friendly games that Nintendo's core audience could appreciate, but they also had plenty of mature games that Nintendo would never have the balls to make themselves, and they helped carry Nintendo for years. And then in the 6th generation, a generation where Nintendo was falling pretty far behind its competition, they decide to sell their golden studio to one of their direct competitors. Huh? Every time I remember this happened, it just gets more ridiculous in my head. This is like if the PS5 wasn't doing so well, so Sony just sells Naughty Dog to Valve and hands Gaben custody over Neil Druckmann's children. Speaking of Neil Druckmann, you guys think Last of Us 2 is divisive? You make me laugh. I am laughing. Prepare to meet Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts.
Oh, no! No!
Now, I'm of the opinion that this isn't some degenerate abomination of mankind, but when you hear Banjo-Kazooie, you probably think of platforming and exploration and pretty much anything besides building shitty cars. The game itself is not even fundamentally that bad, it's just not what me and I think a lot of other people in the Banjo sphere wanted from a Banjo-Kazooie game, especially since the last game came out 8 fucking years ago at this point. So, while it's definitely hyperbolic to say that this game is a huge piece of shit garbage, it certainly felt like a misfire at least. Like, why did they think making a Banjo-Kazooie game about Lego cars was a good idea? I don't know, and it's been 13 years now, so frankly, I don't even really care anymore. What's done is done, and Banjo Nuts and Bolts is a piece of gaming history, for better or worse. The reason I took you on this big retrospective is to contextualize Yooka Laylee and what it meant to me, and I think a lot of other people. Banjo Nuts and Bolts felt like a prank after an 8-year Banjo drought, and then Banjo was just never seen again, and it felt like all hope was gone, and we just had to let it go. But then fast forward a few years later, a Kickstarter project emerges for a game called Yooka Laylee. The aim of the game was to make a Banjo 4-y game with these new stand-in characters and scenarios, and it was being made by a development team consisting of several people who worked on the original games. They started out needing only £175,000 and instead ended up receiving $2.1 million. This Kickstarter alone was record-breaking, and the credits screen is literally 3 hours long because it includes every single Kickstarter backer. It was a very beautiful thing to see. A lot of people really wanted to see a new Banjo game, and they pitched in to make it happen. I didn't pitch in, but I was still in high school when they first announced it, so I didn't have any monies. After years of anticipation and hype, it finally came out, and I heard a bunch of people saying they were disappointed by it. As a huge Banjo fan, I did not want to believe them, and I kinda assumed they were just being dicks. Then I played it myself and yeah, I was a little disappointed too. When I first played this game, I got to the ice level and then just kinda put it down and never touched it again. Somehow I was already bored and forgot about it. It wasn't until recently that I finally got down to it and beat it, and I felt remarkably unsatisfied with it. Don't get me wrong, this is not at all a terrible video game. It works, mostly. It's got some charm and funny characters, it makes a very solid attempt at replicating the atmosphere of Banjo-Kazooie, and it often succeeds to tell you the truth. But at the same time, Yooka Laylee is a contemporary game released over a decade and a half after the originals, and it could have learned a lot from the mistakes and missteps of the games which it's trying to replicate, and could have avoided making those mistakes again with contemporary design paradigms. What could have been a fantastic game sadly took a lot of those problems and made them shockingly worse instead, and the end result is an honestly pretty middle-of-the-road 3D platformer and a major missed opportunity in my opinion. Now, please keep in mind that everything I say in this video, I say with full awareness that this is all subjective and my opinion is just my opinion, so don't let this video alone dissuade you from playing the game or continuing to enjoy it if you're already a fan. I'm not here to ruin your fun, I'm not the fucking Grinch over here, I'm just a fat guy, okay? Don't mind me at all. And I have no ill will towards any of the devs either. In fact, I follow half of them on Twitter, so yeah, we're basically family. Now, some of you may assume that I dislike Yooka Laylee because I have nostalgia blindness and just want it to be exactly one-to-one with the original games, but that's only maybe partially true. As a matter of fact, a big part of it is actually the opposite. If you want proof, I made a video last year talking shit about those games and pointing out the various mistakes that I believe they made. Because while I like these games, I have no delusions of them being flawless. Maybe I did when I was younger, but not anymore. These games have plenty of issues that I think could be ironed out in a contemporary reimagining like Yooka Laylee, and it's more so that I found the game did the opposite instead, and that's why I was disappointed. I cannot force you to watch that video, but it does add a lot of context to this video, so it might be helpful, I don't know. That reminds me, a while ago I offhandedly mentioned my disappointment in Yooka Laylee, and I got this comment telling me that the only reason I dislike the game is because I expected it to somehow be 10 times better than it is because it's a contemporary game. And to some extent, I mean, yeah, kinda, that is somewhat how I feel. I mean, let's be real here. Game design is a constantly evolving art form, and even the best classic games tend to have problems that could honestly be fixed by contemporary game design paradigms. Like, we have people today who literally can't play Super Mario 64 for God's sake, so that should be proof enough of that. That's not to say I expect all contemporary games to literally be 10 times better than old ones. Avengers Endgame is not better than The Godfather Part 2, and Balan Wonderworld is not better than Rayman. But there are some areas where the standards of newer games are honestly more polished and refined than those of older games. Take something like classic Doom. Now, I love classic Doom, but holy shit, this game is confusing. You blow your enemies to hell for like 10 minutes, then you're left in this labyrinthine, empty, big-ass map trying to find out where the fucking exit is. This game drives me insane. Then, Doom 2016 comes out. Much less confusing level design where it's very clear where you're supposed to go, but it still has hidden secrets here and there that you can find if you're observant enough. Retro formulas brushed up with more refined contemporary paradigms are a wet dream in my opinion, and I never literally expected Yooka Laylee to be 10 times better than it was, but I did expect it to make some measurable improvements upon the retro formula that was being used over a decade and a half before this game came out, or at the very least, not to make the problems they already had worse. Before I played Yooka Laylee, I saw a review of the game by a small YouTube channel that maybe you heard of. I think his name was Video Game Donkey or something like that, I don't know. But as a game critic, this donkey fellow is someone I find myself agreeing with every so often, and even when I don't agree with him, I can usually at least tell where he's coming from. So he uploads this very unfavorable review of Yooka Laylee saying that he was disappointed with the game for a variety of reasons. And even though I could see where he was coming from, this video didn't actually dissuade me from playing it, because in the beginning of the video, he had some criticisms of Banjo-Tooie which I couldn't really get on board with. Since I'm a huge fan of Banjo-Tooie, I had to keep that in mind and contextualize his opinion within his personal taste, and think about how I may be able to extrapolate that into my own viewpoint. Now, to be clear, it is valid for him not to like Banjo-Tooie, but I figured there was a possibility that because he hated both Tooie and Yooka Laylee, it was possible that he disliked them for the same reasons, which could imply that Yooka Laylee is closer to Tooie than Kazooie, so Donkey doesn't like it, but Phantom Beano sure as hell might. Because remember, Tooie, in spite of its flaws, is one of my favorite games ever made, so to win me over, Yooka Laylee could benefit hugely from being like Banjo-Tooie. And to some extent, it was, but often not in the good ways. Before I start shitting on the game though, let's talk about some of the game's good qualities. Banjo-Tooie had this stupid RNG-based Jinjo segregation, which added a layer of inconsistency to the replayability. So Yooka Laylee got rid of that. There's this cool move where you turn invisible. I really like the casino level. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion, but I don't really care. It kind of reminds me of Sonic Adventure. There's some genuinely funny Rareware style humor and a ton of not so cleverly disguised adult jokes. My favorite one is this one where the frog guy is telling you how to do the fishing minigame and he says, "Get ready to cast your rod out." And then Laylee says, "Yooka is better with his tongue, to be honest." Oh boy. Capital B is a funny villain, maybe not as iconic or memorable as Grunty, but he's still funny, especially when he makes jokes about microtransactions. I remember when the game first came out, people were saying this guy was a metaphor for Microsoft buying Rare or some shit, I don't know. Yooka and Laylee are very endearing characters that even though they're supposed to be Banjo and Kazooie, they feel like their own thing. I cannot lie, I love these guys, like, a lot. Grant Kirkhope brought his A-game as usual. The graphics are very pretty when they want to be. You can now transform back into Yooka and Laylee on demand instead of walking back to the transformation ray or leaving the level, and to be honest, there were moments in this game that I felt were very satisfying and fun. But those moments were not very consistent or even necessarily frequent for a number of reasons, which is why the video is called Yooka Laylee Could Have Been Fantastic. The big thing is navigation and level design. Yooka Laylee has these massive sprawling levels with multiple layers and sub-areas, which on paper seems like a really cool idea, because that's kinda how the originals were, but so many parts of these levels end up looking the same, and there are so many little areas that are so often blocked from your point of view to the point that in order to get a good lay of the land, you had to constantly be doing 360s with the camera, just to find Rextro's arcade, which was probably just blocked by a fucking tree or some shit like that. That is, until you get the flight move, which pretty much invalidates most of the game and lets you bypass half the challenges. The way the levels are designed can make it very difficult to partition tasks in your head while playing, and it's often difficult to tell where you've already been or if you've adequately explored every inch of the land. Banjo-Tooie sometimes had this problem. My least favorite Tooie level is Pterodactyl Land because everything looks the same and there's a billion doors that go somewhere different, and even though the use of verticality is really cool, it also makes navigation a pain in the ass. But you know what Banjo-Tooie has that Yooka Laylee doesn't? Landmarks and vantage points and a detailed fast travel system. The fast travel system in Banjo-Tooie is so useful because even if you don't really remember the name of the sub-area you want to go to, there's always a picture of a relevant character's face next to it to remind you that, okay, this is the Mumbo area, this is the Wumba area. You don't always have to know or care about the name of the place as long as you remember that an important character is there who maybe you have to do something for, or maybe can help you out or something. A lot of the levels also have these vantage points that let you get a good lay of the land and figure out where you've been and where you haven't been and where you should go next, and when that's not the case, they otherwise tend to have memorable landmarks or features that stick out in your memory so you remember, this is the circus tent where there's probably a boss fight. This is the space area with the shitty alien mascots. This is Atlantis with all the ancient sunken buildings. At the very least, the levels are usually segmented and easy to partition in your head. With Yooka Laylee, you often don't really have those advantages, so it ends up being a pain in the ass just to navigate the world. Yooka could have at least had some kind of warp pad system or maybe a more contemporary solution like some kind of map or a radar. It doesn't have to be an extremely detailed map that just tells you where all the collectibles are like Mario Odyssey and makes the game baby food, but maybe just so you have some idea of where you are. Just a little thing to help you place yourself in the world. At the same time, a lot of the game's world often feels very fake and plastic. In the original games, the worlds often felt like actual cohesive places to an extent, like the amusement park and the factory and the beach, the mines, the haunted mansion. They all felt like realistic places that could almost actually exist, and they're always populated with relevant characters. They all have interesting and funny and relevant things to say. It's hard to put into words, but the levels feel very video gamey, and I know that probably sounds fucking ridiculous to a lot of you, but just the overabundance of these robotic platforms and shit, and the same NPCs showing up in every single level, and just the back-to-back linear-ass rooms like this that just exist for no other reason than to give you more video gamey reasons to do video game stuff. It just feels really flat and fake. But I still like the casino. There are so many areas that look like they could be going somewhere or like they could be hiding something, but then you go there and it's either some invisible wall or there's nothing there at all. Or sometimes your body goes through the floor as though exploring the game's world is a glitch that you're not supposed to be doing, and this became abundantly clear when I unlocked the ability to fly. I ended up flying all over the place looking for secrets. I thought I would find all kinds of cool ass shit and collectibles that I didn't even know existed, and time again I would be rewarded with nothing, and the feeling of disappointment would become routine, and it felt quite underwhelming in the long run. I'm not just talking about obviously out of bound areas either. The proportion of spaces within bounds that you can explore that just have nothing gives me the opposite feeling of the Banjo games. For a game that's supposed to be about exploration and adventure, it was very sad to me that a lot of these technically explorable areas had no reason to be there, and that the game in turn so often failed to reward my own sense of exploration and adventure. The game only has 5 worlds packed with 25 pages and 200 quills each. You'd think that would make every level feel densely packed with content, as though there were things to find everywhere, and would reward you greatly for leaving no stone unturned, especially compared to the originals, which had fewer collectibles per level on the whole. But shockingly, the game somehow manages to feel very sparse and thin, as though the content is stretched over too wide an area, and again, ultimately achieves the opposite of what the games it's supposedly trying to replicate managed to. Again, the casino level is the possible exception because there are tokens and breakable slot machines everywhere full of tokens and stupid pinball things that suck ass. This is pretty much my favorite level, and since it's so clearly closed off with 4 walls, the space doesn't feel wasted or empty, but again, exception. There's also this thing Yooka Laylee does where even when you unlock the world, it doesn't unlock the entire world. You need to leave the world once you got enough pages and fork out some more for the expanded world. I think the idea behind this was so you could choose between exploring the entire world or just go to the next one, but I don't know. It feels like they overthought it. It's not exactly terrible, but it just feels unnecessary. But of course, I say that fully aware that I'm wasted on these kinds of games, so I can usually find enough collectibles to progress either way. In an homage to Donkey Kong 64, Yooka Laylee contains a number of mini-games that are so annoying they'll make you want to stick your skull inside a hydraulic press. The mini-games are super cool because I bought a Banjo-Kazooie inspired 3D platformer to play Flappy Bird. I admit this is a very personal and subjective complaint, but that's kind of the entire point of the video. But even in games that I really like, I can usually take or leave the mini-games. I just don't find them enjoyable a lot of the time. They just feel like a distraction from the actual game that I wanted to play. Do you guys remember Rayman 2 for the baby Glowbox minigame? No, of course not. Nobody gives a shit about that. They just want to be Rayman. Now, you're not going to find Beaver Bitch tier bullshit in these minigames, although they aren't really anything to write home about either. There's this minecart minigame in every level, which is supposed to be like Donkey Kong Country, I assume, except it's a complete dickhead and makes me want to tear my own heart out through my chest, because it's a constantly rotating 3D world that jerks the camera around and messes up your perspective. Sometimes attacking the enemies just doesn't work, so you gotta use projectiles, except they're not collectibles like the eggs. They're only available in very context-specific areas, so they're kinda useless. I didn't have way too much trouble with the camera because I'm wasted on these older games, except this one time it glitched and wouldn't allow me to zoom all the way out for some inexplicable reason, and some other occasional freakouts. Again, Yooka Laylee could have used a contemporary solution to this. by which I mean make the camera fucking good. Let's talk about the moves. Remember the Talon Trot in Banjo-Kazooie? You know, the move that every single person who plays the game uses constantly because it's an extremely convenient and quick way to get around? Well, this game's version of the Talon Trot is limited by a damn power meter, and also, since it's Laylee rolling on Yooka like a circus ball, the controls are really frustrating and sloppy instead of being tight and precise. And when you combine that with slippery icy slopes and shit, it's just infernal. It's a move that could have been useful for these massive levels that ends up being just kinda dog ass. Then there's the flying move. The controls for this are really awkward and in many ways worse than the original games, but at the same time it kinda just breaks the game because it just lets you avoid everything and skip entire platforming sections because you can do it anywhere because fuck you, I'm Yooka Laylee. The invisibility move is really cool. You got this move where you gain the properties of whatever you eat, which is really nice. There's this other move where you eat elemental fruits and can shoot projectiles out of your mouth, which I think was supposed to be this game's version of the egg shooter, but a lot more streamlined so that only the correct type shows up in the relevant place. I would get a little annoyed at this for removing the freedom you get with using whatever eggs you want, but this isn't actually that big a deal in the long run. The moves never reach the inventiveness of something like Banjo-Tooie, but there are some new things here and there, and all things considered, that is pretty cool. And that's the whole point of this video. The reason I say Yooka Laylee could have been fantastic is because, as I said, there are some endearing qualities to it, and it has a lot of untapped potential in my opinion. Fundamentally, the moves are there, there's some fun platforming and charming humor, but it's inconsistent as hell. It doesn't feel nearly as polished as its contemporaries or predecessors. There's always something that just knocks the wind out of it right when you think it's getting good. Whether it's stretches of nothing or annoying parts that make you want to throw your computer monitor out the window. If I had to recommend a good version of Yooka Laylee, the closest thing I could say is A Hat in Time. This was another indie Kickstarter game from around the same time period. It's a love letter to classic 3D platformers and games in general. It doesn't have as many collectibles or worlds as big as Yooka Laylee, but turns out that's not actually a big deal. A huge reason this game is so great is that it's a love letter to the golden oldies that takes very clear and obvious inspiration from those games, but it's also its own game which allows it to have its own identity. Instead of trying really hard to be something that it wasn't, it became a wonderful Frankenstein monster of fresh ideas and old endearing ideas, and since it's not as huge, it feels more dense and more consistently good. There's more personality, more liveliness, better world building. It's got a mix of more open-ended missions and more linear ones, but it plays to the strengths of both. The worlds are expansive, but not so ungodly huge that you'll get lost in them. It's great, it's focused, it's efficient, and it's fun as hell. And they didn't remove JonTron either.
Oh hey, little chirper. They're recording right now, so no one's allowed in.
And they did it all with less than a fifth of the budget of Yooka Laylee, which proves once again that showering something with money does not automatically translate into success. That being said, I don't think Yooka Laylee is a terrible game. It's a serviceable game, a good 6 out of 10 maybe. I don't really give numbers, but that's probably what I'd give it if I did. It has some redeeming qualities like the characters and music and sometimes the graphics. It's just a game that could have benefited from a little more polish and variety and consistency, and by trying to be a Banjo game but falling short on their strengths while playing up their weaknesses in many respects, it ends up feeling like a cut above middle of the road. But I guess that's just how it goes sometimes. That being said, I don't want to dissuade you from playing it if you're curious. There are a lot of people who really like this one, so maybe me and everyone who dislikes it just happens to be a dumb fucker moron or whatever, so, you know, that's just me. I heard the Impossible Lair is considered to be way better though, so Playtonic is still a reputable studio. I don't want to drag their name through the mud. And this game is a quality product in some respects, but, Hey cousins, I just want to thank you for watching this video. This was a labor of love. A billion things went wrong, again, including me accidentally leaving GeForce Experience recording for 2 days straight, which created this fucking huge ass 537 gig file that almost permanently destroyed my hard drive, which I didn't even know that was a thing that could happen, but apparently it is, so fucking rip, except it didn't actually happen, so thank God. I should mention I have an Instagram now. I don't know how many people care about that, but maybe I'll post video updates or random things there. I don't know, but on the other hand, play A Hat in Time. It's real good.